Did you know your inner child and inner critic are in a subconscious and codependent relationship? The inner child and the inner critic represent two contrasting subconscious entities within our psyche, which are often in conflict with one another. In my view, understanding their relationship is key to therapeutic work as a transformational coach, especially practicing inner child therapy. Whereas the inner child embodies our emotions, vulnerabilities, creativity, and unmet needs from childhood, the inner critic serves as that harsh, judgmental voice in our head that critiques and controls. Originally seeking to protect us from perceived threats, often in an unhealthy manner when growing up. The inner child, vulnerability and emotional authenticity is the mark of the inner child. The inner child embodies that part of our subconscious psyche that carries our emotional truths, our unmet needs and desires and vulnerabilities that stem from early childhood experiences. This part of the psyche is intended to be pure, innocent and curious, but will also hold any deep wounds from unresolved trauma, neglect or emotional invalidation during childhood. When we connect with our inner child, initially through our imagination, we are attempting to access our authentic self, the emotional core that longs for love, safety, and acceptance. Our inner child needs to be acknowledged, validated, and nurtured to heal and flourish. Establishing our unmet needs and meeting them is key to therapeutic growth. As transformational coaches, we teach our clients how to take personal responsibility for meeting those needs, eventually for themselves. We also model this nurturing and compassion in the therapeutic process. Now, the inner critic is about self-protection and judgment. The inner critic is a negative internal voice that functions as, or at least originally, as a self-protective mechanism often learned in childhood as a way of coping with criticism, constant criticism often, rejection, or fear. It will have been formed in response to harsh parenting, societal expectations, or negative experiences, acting as a kind of internalized authority figure. The inner critic is driven by fear. Its primary subconscious aim is to prevent emotional pain by enforcing perfectionism, hypervigilance, or avoidance. However, as we grow into adulthood, instead of offering protection, the inner critic often perpetuates these early wounding experiences with self-doubt, low self-esteem, and even emotional paralysis. So there is a relational conflict and tension between the inner child and inner critic. This relationship between the inner child and your inner critic is frequently one of balanced conflict. Because of its subconscious nature, I call these entities the filial psyche. The inner critic, in its effort to keep us safe growing up, often suppresses or invalidates the needs and emotions of our inner child. For example, criticism of vulnerability. The inner critic may well judge the emotional needs of our inner child as weak or irrational, telling us to toughen up or stop being so emotional. This creates an internalized tension where the emotional needs of your inner child are dismissed, leading to ongoing and persistent emotional suppression or repression. Also, there's a fear of unmet needs. The inner critic may push us to avoid situations that bring up unresolved feelings from childhood, reinforcing beliefs such as you'll never be good enough, or don't ask for help, you'll just get hurt. This fear-driven control suppresses or cuts off opportunities for emotional healing and growth. Also, perfectionism versus playfulness. While the inner child seeks play, joy, and creative expression, the inner critic might shut this down with demands for perfection or productivity, preventing a person from engaging in activities that could nurture authenticity and even spirituality. So, why the inner critic exists is worth discussing. It's important to understand that the inner critic's harshness often stems from a well-intentioned desire to protect us growing up. It arose as a kind of coping mechanism during times when, as children, we are feeling hurt, rejected, or afraid. However, while its intentions may be protective, the inner critic's methods are counterproductive. Instead of fostering growth, it creates an internal environment of negativity and emotional harm, resulting in out-of-awareness self-sabotage. So let's look at healing this relationship through dialogue and integration. Healing the relationship between the inner child and the inner critic requires inner work that fosters understanding, working towards integration rather than this ongoing conflict. We do this by deflating the power of the inner critic, by introducing a developing, nurturing parent that was missing in childhood. But first, we start with, in our therapeutic process, we start with building compassion for our inner child, recognizing that our inner child's needs are legitimate. Certainly in transformational coaching, clients are encouraged to create space for their inner child's emotions and their unmet needs growing up. The goal is to develop a nurturing parent and a nurturing relationship that validates these feelings rather than suppressing them. Secondly, we set about understanding the inner critic's role. Rather than simply silencing the inner critic, the work involves understanding its original role in managing our childhood fears. By acknowledging that the inner critic is a kind of protector, albeit an overbearing one, clients can begin to shift the tone of their inner critic from one of harsh judgment to introducing a more supportive inner guide, namely that of a nurturing parent. Now we start to encourage reparenting through self-compassion. Transformational coaches will reparent their client's inner child by introducing this compassionate, nurturing parent into the client's psyche. Clients can then gradually transform the voice of this inner critic into one that offers positive, constructive feedback rather than harsh condemnation. Compassionate self-talk and setting realistic expectations become essential tools in deflating the inner critic's dominance, that negative voice in your head that no longer serves any purpose. So now we must balance the needs of both psychic entities, both the inner critic and the inner child. Transformational coaching can help individuals create a balanced internal dialogue where both the emotional needs of our inner child and the protective concerns of an inner critic are addressed by building a nurturing parent within our client's mindset. This will involve setting appropriate boundaries for the inner critic, whilst ensuring the inner child has a safe space for emotional and thoughtful expression. Transformational coaches will introduce techniques to help with emotional regulation, such as, for example, mindfulness, and also cognitive reframing can help clients regulate their emotional responses triggered by this negative inner critic, reducing the inner conflict between self-criticism and emotional vulnerability. Introducing a nurturing parent fills the vacuum that is created as the inner critic, or critical parent as we often call it, is gradually and successfully disempowered. So in conclusion, in this video, I want to say that the inner child and the inner critic are two deeply influential subconscious aspects of our psyche. Their relationship often shapes our internal world, with the inner critic attempting to protect us from pain, early emotional pain, and the inner child seeking emotional expression and healing. By developing an inner dialogue that nurtures our inner child while disempowering the inner critic's voice, with our new and burgeoning, developing, nurturing parent, our clients can experience profound emotional healing and a greater sense of self-compassion. The key is not to eliminate our inner critic, but to turn down the volume of its influence, introducing a new nurturing parent that is one of kindness, wisdom, and protection, with its major role of attending to the emotional well-being of our inner child. If you would like to benefit from transformational coaching, please get in touch. Visit my website, stephenelliker.coach, and book a free discovery call. And let's see what's possible.